Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our ONA webinar series. Thanks for those who are here present as well. Before I introduce Dr. Spiegal, I just want to make a quick announcement. As many of you know, this center, UF Range Cattle Research and Education Center, along with Archibald Biological Center, we are part of the USDA Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Network. We also refer to that as LTIR. And you probably heard about LTIR, but if you're not familiar, LTIR consisted of a group of 18 premier long-term research sites that are looking at national strategies for the sustainable intensification of U.S. agriculture production. And what we decide our site, along with Archibald, decide to do is launch this LTIR webinar series. So Dr. Spiegal will be our inaugural speaker. We're very happy to have her with us today. And so what I want to ask you to please stay tuned for more updates to come in the near future about our LTIR webinar series. With that, I would like to introduce you all to Dr. Spiegal, and also thank Dr. Spiegal for accepting the invitation to participate in our ONA webinar. Dr. Spiegal is a range management specialist at USDA ARS Range Management Research Unit in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Her research program is focused on understanding the effects of agriculture management strategies on environmental, economic, and social sustainability outcomes in U.S. agriculture. Prior to this position, Dr. Spiegal also worked as a postdoctoral research assistant at the USDA ARS Jornada Experimental Range Station in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Dr. Spiegal earned her PhD in Environmental Science, Policy, and Management from University of California, Berkeley, and also master's from the same institution in Range Management. Dr. Spiegal is very active in the LTIR network community. She leads and co-leads a number of efforts, including the Manureshed, which will be the main topic of her presentation today. But she's also the lead of the LTIR Indicators Working Group. She also is the co-director of the Sustainable Southwest Beef Coordinated Agriculture Project. She also served in the past as the chair of the Rangeland Ecology section of the Ecological Society of America community. So please help me welcome Dr. Spiegal. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Silveira. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you to Andrea for coordinating this excellent web event. So I am calling in today from the Chihuahuan Desert in southern New Mexico. And this is a place of vast and diverse rangelands. So I thought I would just give you a taste here of just some of the diversity of rangelands that we're working with here in the Chihuahuan Desert. And as Maria mentioned, importantly, my unit is part of the Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Network, which Maria just said is designed to evaluate strategies for the sustainable intensification of agriculture. And importantly, this is in regionally appropriate ways, but under a national umbrella of collaboration and knowledge. So it's really an exciting network to work with. And there we are down there in southern New Mexico. So like your LTIR site, or like the work in Florida, our LTIR site comprises multiple partners, or multiple partners make up our site. So we have the Agricultural Research Service Range Management Research Unit, which is also known as the Jornada Experimental Range. We work closely with New Mexico State University in our LTIR site. And together, we were awarded a large grant from NIFA, from the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, It's a 5-year coordinated agricultural project, and this project has really helped us to galvanize our LTAR work and really strengthen our connections in the region and really strengthen our collaboration. Okay, so the LTAR network is dedicated to advancing sustainable intensification. So, what is sustainable intensification? Well, it's defined as increasing agricultural production while not harming the environment or human well being. That's one way to define it. The way that a lot of us look at it in the network is that it's all about minimizing trade offs while maximizing co-benefits among these different goals. And here you can see these goals in these different domains of economics and, sorry, I'm just social goals, productivity goals, environmental goals, and human condition goals. So really it becomes this grand synthesis of trade-offs and co-benefits. And so how can our strategies really maximize benefits while minimizing trade-offs among these different domains? And what we've learned over the last several years, and as I'm sure that many of you know, is that stakeholder engagement, which says engorgement here, which was not intentional, and co-production of knowledge are critical in this to really minimize these trade-offs and maximize co-benefits. We don't want to engorge stakeholders, though, I promise you that. So the title of my talk includes supply chain, the term supply chain. So why are we engaging in supply chain research? Well, it's really a matter of scale. So when we're looking at sustainable intensification at these multiple scales, you can think of looking at the trade-offs and the co-benefits from the patch up through pasture level to ranches to landscapes up to regions. And so supply chain research really allows us to think about sustainable intensification and the trade-offs and co-benefits of these different management strategies beyond ranch gates. So that's really where I find supply chain research to be very useful for understanding how these systems work and how the different scales connect with each other so we can really minimize those trade-offs. And the Florida site of LTAR has been a natural partner in sustainability research with the Jornada site. And and it's been a pleasure and an honor to learn from the scientists at your site. And I've learned quite a bit over the years. And so some of the things that we work on together across the network include sustainability issues and sustainability challenges around supplying socially acceptable beef, issues around uneven nutrient distribution, and also measuring the impact of agricultural innovations through indicators. So Maria had mentioned the indicators working group, and I certainly have learned a lot from the Florida LTAR scientists about that work and about all these things. I also want to bring your attention here to Dr. Silveira, who came to New Mexico and was colder than she, I think, thought she could have been in New Mexico, and we were all quite cold that day looking at some manure applications up in the mountains in the Gila National Forest. Okay, so today I'm going to drill down more into our work on supplying socially acceptable beef and issues around uneven nutrient distribution and those two things together and how we're building solutions and evaluating strategies around these sustainability challenges. Okay, so as far as supplying socially acceptable beef, what motivates our work at the Jornada, and I think also in the Florida site and other sites in LTAR working around beef production, is a suite of challenges and opportunities. So I think we're all aware of this kind of general story that the demand for beef is on the rise, especially internationally and in some of our export markets. But at the same time, consumer concerns are also increasing. So concerns about greenhouse gases, fossil energy use, freshwater consumption of beef, and some land degradation concerns around beef production. Now, I know these are all kind of controversial, and the numbers to really model what these impacts are they're elusive at best, depending on which numbers are used, but these are the consumer concerns that we're dealing with. More locally, in range and pasture systems of both the US and Canada, a lot of these agro ecosystems or these regions where grazing is really dominant, either over space or over with economic returns, as far as the it's like the one of the dominant agricultural production systems. What these regions are experiencing are global warming and what some people have called global weirding, because it's not getting warm everywhere, but it's certainly getting weird. A lot of these systems are experiencing vegetation regime shifts, so we're dealing a lot with woody plant encroachment here. Other places are just dealing with other types of invasives. Um, Razor thin margins of economic return. So as I'm sure most of us on the call are aware, ranchers and other beef producers are really dealing with these really these really risky economic environments without much guarantee of a major profit in all years. There's also a reliance on supplemental feed, and we're hearing more about that actually through USDA programs and an increase in hay use on these rangeland and pastureland systems. Also, what's interesting as both a challenge and an opportunity is that in a lot of these grazing oriented agro ecosystems, there's the reliance on other regions for finishing, marketing, and distribution of meat. And so that can, again, both be in the space of both a challenge and an opportunity. One important thing to keep in mind is that even though ranching has all these challenges and these consumer concerns potentially, it can also really protect against more intensive uses. So it can keep landscapes open and potentially have higher biodiversity values and other kind of land values that a lot of us care about. So that's an important piece of this whole puzzle of challenges and opportunities. A second problem or issue or concern or challenge that the Jornada site and the Florida site and other LTIR sites are working on together is this problem of uneven nutrient distribution in US agriculture and Canadian agriculture. And so we see this as a wicked problem, really, that's beyond the control of any single producer, research site, industry, or region. And so a wicked problem in this case is something that doesn't have a really defined edges and doesn't have a clear solution, and that in a lot of times the solutions come with their own issues and problems. So this uneven nutrient distribution is a major challenge for our society to deal with now and in years to come. And so this uneven nutrient distribution really can trace back to the uncoupling of crops and livestock, and also the concentration of these respective industries and the intensification of these respective industries. So these things are a major driver of what we're seeing now with uneven nutrient distribution. And so up on the top are crops, major crops shown in different colors, and then on the bottom are animals or confined livestock shown in different colors. And what you can see is that corn is really, as we all know, concentrated in the corn belt up there in orange. And then we have poultry production down there in the southeast in blue. So the poultry consume the corn, but there's no clear mechanism or clear set of strategies or policies to return the manure nutrients from the poultry back to the corn to grow more corn. And so this kind of uncoupling and concentration and intensification really leads to patchy nutrient issues where the corn in the upper West really needs a lot of nutrients. The poultry in the Southeast are producing a lot of nutrients, but they're not, but the poultry nutrients aren't necessarily getting to the corn nutrients. These kind of issues result in some concerns, really widespread concerns, such as disruption of air quality, water quality, and quality of life for those living near stocks of concentrated manure, as well as deterioration of ecosystems, as we see here with algal blooms from excess phosphorus. And then at the same time, we're dealing with this scarcity of fertilizer resources. So in Florida, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the phosphorus mining, and because phosphorus is rock-based, or the phosphorus we use in fertilizers is rock-based. And so by some estimates, if we continue mining phosphorus at this same rate, we will run out of rock phosphorus within 300 years, which might sound like a long time, but it's actually kind of a short time to figure out how to recycle phosphorus from existing sources into crops if we want to keep our systems kind of feeding the world. Okay, so looking at both of these issues of supplying socially acceptable beef and dealing with this uneven nutrient distribution, we have developed this concept of the manure shed, which is designed to solve the wicked problem of uneven nutrient distribution via the reintegration crop livestock industries, with one of the outcomes being to supply socially acceptable beef and other agricultural products. So here is one potential solution which addresses both of those challenges. And so, but of course it comes with trade-offs, which we'll discuss later. But so we've defined a manure shed as encompassing the land surrounding animal feeding operations onto which nutrients can be redistributed to meet environmental, production, and economic goals. So here again, you see those different domains of goals. We are also expanding this definition to say that those lands don't necessarily need to be exactly surrounding the animal feeding operation, which you'll see in a bit as we talk about recycling manure nutrients back to over extensive distances within the same industry. Okay, so the Manure Shed Working Group, which is made up of 10 different LTIR sites with some very active participation from Florida, we have an action research cycle that we're building to really optimize regional scale or industry scale manure sheds. And so I'll just run you quickly through these steps. So basically our research cycle entails identifying hot spots of surplus manure and those productive lands that could use it. And so together, those hot spots of surplus and the lands that can take it in together, that's a manure shed. Next, we explore management in that manure shed and really learn about what's already happening and the systems already in place. We then evaluate opportunities and barriers for coordinated recycling. And a lot of this work, it's exciting. We're working with a social scientist who is mapping social networks around these opportunities and barriers and the people who really make this recycling, or as Maria called it the other day, manure trading possible. Then we assess the trade-offs of recycling, and this is just a hypothetical look at the various trade-offs that can come through in a region from recycling manure from concentrated feedlots on the crops. And then importantly here, we ensure engagement and informational feedbacks for action on the ground. Again, this is stakeholder engagement, not engorgement. But so during this engagement process, this is really what makes these things, what could make this research into a reality, either through policy or through management, through economic incentives. And then the idea, because this is a cycle, it's start over again. So see how steps 1 through 4 has affected hotspots of surplus and lands that can use it. So this is our research cycle. And so we've looked at this research cycle we've looked at this approach in a couple of different ways. So in an overview paper in 2020 in the journal Agricultural Systems, we really focused on these regional scale manure sheds that you can see here. We focused on 4 of them because they really had the most counties that were sources for manure phosphorus. In other words, the feedlots in those counties produce more manure phosphorus than could be assimilated by the croplands in those counties. So we looked at assemblages of those source counties across the US and looked at some of the biggest assemblages of source counties, and then calculated the number of sink counties surrounding them that were necessary to recycle that surplus manure phosphorus from the sources. And so we ended up with 4 major regional scale manure sheds, focusing on 4 major livestock industries, so poultry, swine, dairy, and beef. Work that we're developing and that we have in review right now and that I'm going to be covering today is more of an industry scale manure shed, and we're focusing on the case of US and Canadian beef industries. And so part of this work is really getting clear on what a beef supply chain looks like, especially beef supply chains originating from ranching, from range and pasture systems. in those agro ecosystems that I was talking about where grazing is dominant. So a supply chain that you can envision is starts with cow-calf ranching on pasture or range, where the cow produce, the goal is for the cow to produce one healthy calf a year. That calf is exported to weight to gain weight on stocker operations, either on wheat or irrigated pasture, or as that longer arrow shows down there, the calves are exported directly to grain feed yards, which we were surprised to learn happens more often than we thought. Then they finish out their life cycle on the grain feed yards, and then there's slaughter and processing and then distribution to various channels. So this is a very basic beef supply chain. Importantly, hay, and hay is an important part of a lot of these links in the chain, either to supplement feed on range or pasture and in the grain feed yard, as shown there with those concentric circles. So what we are exploring is this opportunity to potentially take the manure nutrients from the feedlots, so from the confined feeding setting where you can actually collect the manure and then redistribute it. So you collect it from the built environment, redistribute it. So there's a couple different approaches here. So that's looking at so on the right there, you could send those manure nutrients to the grains that go into the feed yards, or you could export them back to those grazing agro ecosystems to grow hay. So these are two different types of scenarios of manure shed recycling in the beef supply chain or the beef industry of the US and Canada. And so importantly, these are both different approaches to circularity. Hearing more about the concepts of circularity, which have gained in popularity in European circles of about agricultural sustainability, and it's really getting more attention here in the U.S. as well with some societies, agricultural societies. And so the basic idea about circularity, it's pretty intuitive. It's very hard to achieve, but it's the repeated reuse of resources and materials to advance sustainability goals, and again, to minimize those trade-offs among the different domains. So this is the setup, or this is the scenario, or this is the aspiration that I'm going to be focusing on for the rest of my talk, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So it's been great working with the Manureshed group on a series of papers for a special section. So related to this beef industry manure shed work, we recently published a data set that's publicly available. And so this is data to really help us understand flows of cattle, manure production in feedlots, and then hay use, and I'll get into that in a bit. But hay nutrient needs in the grazing agro ecosystems where the cattle originated. And we are about to submit a paper based on that data set and some other data, which I will explain in my next slides. Okay, so in this work, a major piece of this work is really understanding the geography of US and Canadian beef. And for us, there's been a focus on where are the grazing cattle, where are the feedlots, where are the fed cattle, and where are the major slaughterhouses, or otherwise known as processing plants. And so what we found is that grazing cattle, or grazing beef cows that produce those calves to go into the supply chain, are everywhere in the US and scattered all across Canada where it's warm enough to maintain crop and livestock agriculture in an intensified way. But then the feeding operations are much more concentrated. So here you see them more in the middle of the country. In the US, that's in orange. So the grazing cattle are in blue. The feeding operations are in orange. And so this is on a county level, and then on a sub-provincial level in Canada. You see the grazing cows spread everywhere. You see the feeding more concentrated, and you see the slaughterhouses correlated mostly with the feeding counties and sub provincial units there. We're also highlighting hay on this map, so anything with a brown circle around it is where 50% or more of cropland is dedicated to hay production, so either alfalfa or grass, as they count it in the ag censuses in both the US and Canada. So getting super clear on where things are happening is a big part of the Manureshed endeavor so far. And collecting the data and understanding the data and interpreting it is a major endeavor. And I'm glad to be doing it with my collaborators, because we can all interpret different data sets with our own local knowledge and really help each other understand what the data mean. Okay, so with that geography in mind, we are evaluating 3 different beef manure shed management strategies, and I will describe these 3 strategies. And so basically 2 of them are aspirational and not done yet in society, but we're kind of modeling how they work, and also comparing those then to like the business as usual of what's actually happening, and then in the end comparing their suite of trade-offs and co-benefits. So that's our overall approach here. Okay, so the first strategy that we are looking at is an aspirational one, where we are coupling feedlots and hay, and the hay produced for grazing cattle through manure recycling within the beef sector. And so that is specifically within the beef sector. And what we're doing is following cattle from their grazing lands to feedlot where hay is produced for them, to feedlots, seeing how much manure they produce, figuring out how much is recoverable, and then modeling what it takes to get it back to the hay where they originated. So that is an aspirational management approach. There's a second approach where we explored in that first overview paper, where we look at assemblages of source counties, or counties that are sources for manure, phosphorus, and nitrogen, and then count how many or figure out how many surrounding counties are necessary to assimilate that manure from those sources. And so this takes a lot of coordination, both within the source counties and in the surrounding counties. And the assumption here is that all of the manure nutrients are assimilated or spread onto croplands within those source counties and in the surrounding counties. So this takes quite a bit of coordination, not just in the beef sector, but across sectors. And then we are comparing those approaches that don't yet exist with what we consider to be business as usual, which is also a great approach with a lot of pros and a few cons. But so this is coupling feedlots on an ad hoc basis with some local crop producers. And so we learned about that through interviews by our social scientists. So anyway, so these are the 3 different approaches that we are comparing and contrasting. So I'll tell you a bit about these and then give you some ideas about how we are comparing the trade-offs. Okay, so this first management approach, so this entails, as I said before, so we're looking at 3 different grazing agroecosystems, or grazing-centric agroecosystems. So New Mexico, Florida, and then Western Canada, that we're treating as one assemblage due to just data, how the data are served up. So we calculated the amount of hay that grazing cattle consume in each of those agroecosystems. We calculated or estimated the cattle that are exported from those agroecosystems to be finished on feedlots elsewhere. And then we calculated the amount of manure nutrients that they produce in confinement, how much of that manure is available for transport back to the hay that's associated with their provenance, and then looked at the distances involved. So this one is a complicated yet highly circular scenario. So I just want to bring your attention to some results. This is way too much information to cover on a slide or during this talk, but I want to just bring your attention to this. We found the states to which cattle are exported for finishing on grain, also for auction and also for further pasture grazing. So we found all that data from New Mexico, Florida, and Western Canada. And I just have to say this was a hard-won data set that came from local partners. And I want to thank Florida Cattlemen's Association for helping us to interpret some data from the local agricultural agency, the state ag agency, to understand what's happening with Florida exports. So what we found here was that, interestingly, that even though New Mexico, Florida, and Western Canada are really quite different, the hay that we estimated to be grown for grazing cattle within those three places is about 65% of the total hay produced. So that was interesting, that even though they're so different, there's this commonality among them, according to our numbers. And then they also exported the same amount, they also around the same number of cattle to other US states. So that was interesting. So Canada does a lot of, or finishing, the Western Canada case, a lot of finishing within southern Alberta, but also with their exports, it was around the same number as Florida and New Mexico. Okay, so this second aspirational approach, and we always debate this use of aspirational and LTIR. This is like a word construct that might not serve us so well, but it kind of means it's not happening yet, but maybe it's something we want to do in the future. And in this case, might not be fully appropriate actually, but because we're not quite sure if this is aspirational, but it just means a scenario. So in this case, so we're looking at a cluster of source counties, one of the biggest clusters of source counties for beef manure nutrients, and that's in the US, that's in southwestern Kansas. And so there are 5 counties that are adjacent to each other that have manure phosphorus in excess of what their croplands can take in. And then, so there are 7 counties in the green surrounding that source cluster, that are required to assimilate that excess phosphorus. This would also require fully coordinated recycling within the source counties and in the sink counties. So that's that second scenario. And then we learned a lot about what is actually happening on the ground, both through interviews of feedlot manure managers at some of the biggest feedlots in the US. Also from from modeling work from the integrated farm system model that did a statewide assessment of the environmental impacts of beef production. So that was led by Al Rotz, published in 2019. And so we are very grateful to have him on the team to have these estimates. So what this figure shows is that where we did interviews of manure managers, we also had some estimates for the amount of manure phosphorus available for export from these big feedlots. So it's 2 types of data kind of mixed together. But what we learned is that most of the time, this resource is not being exported more than about 20 miles from the feedlot. So around, I guess, around 30 kilometers or less. And that it's being exported, to local partners, kind of based on local social relationships, on a variety of crops. I learned a lot from talking to those folks. Okay, so to review just a quick review of our results. So in this first scenario, at the 15 destination feedlots, either in Alberta or the US states, we calculated about 2,000 megagrams or metric tons of phosphorus that would be available from the cattle that were exported from those 3 grazing land areas. And on average, it would take about 1,300 kilometers to transport that back to the haylands to recycle the manure nutrients there. In this scenario, there was a lot more phosphorus available in that small county assemblage of source counties. Transport distances were much shorter to those adjacent counties. And then in the business as usual case, interestingly, one of those big feedlots in our estimates and our modeled estimates produce almost as much as the manure that's available from the cattle being exported from Florida and New Mexico. So by itself produces that much. And then as I said before, really local transport. So, so there's some value to maybe just focusing on these just like big feedlots, because they account for a lot of the manure nutrients out there to be recycled. Okay, so this is like this grand synthesis of trade-offs of pros and cons. I'm not going to go into all of them, but these are the types of themes that we're looking at and comparing the three strategies against these within these three themes. So there's the magnitude of manure nutrients available, the distance of transport needed, this idea of applying beef manure on hay versus other crops, nutrient needs of the grazing agro ecosystems for the hay needs there, the environmental concerns of the receiving lands, coordination among actors, and then this kind of more theoretical thing, but this idea that we are preparing the world for nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer scarcity. So not only are we kind of looking at some phosphorus losses, but with the nitrogen cycle, we are actually kind of looking at potentially some nitrogen scarcity as well. So anyway, so looking at or nitrogen for fertilizer. So we're looking at these as ways to kind of like prepare the world society for like these shocks and these risks over time. And so with that, I'll just offer my contact information, and hopefully we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you very much for joining us today. At the present, there are no questions in the questions panel. So you all are guests online. If you would like to ask a question, please open your GoToWebinar panel by clicking that little orange box with the white arrow and go to the questions feature, open it, and type in your questions. And then as you saw on that last slide, she did provide her email information, other contact info if you need to follow up in the future. In the room, any questions? No questions here in the room at present. There's no questions in the box. Do you have anything you might like to say in closing as we wait for possibly some questions to show up?
Just that I guess what I want to say is that we did our best to model these numbers. I'd be very glad to hear some feedback about where you might see some of those numbers not fully adding up with your perspective and your experience. So we're definitely open to that kind of conversation. But we did do our best to verify all of it and to understand relationships among different parts of the supply chain to really estimate those numbers to the best of our ability. And I'll say that it wasn't possible without the partnership of people across the network from Western Canada with Shabtai Bittman and others up there, and then at your place with Joe and Maria, and really learning about the local systems and learning together about beef supply chains, and then our partners at Florida Cattlemens and some local places in Western Canada and New Mexico. So, so this really is a network effort, and so thank you. That's all I want to say. We're open to feedback, and to I'd love to hear your opinions and your ideas.
Right, thank you so much. So at the moment, there aren't any questions, but you all that are joining us, if you would like to include a comment or something for Dr. Spiegal, she will see the questions, the survey responses that you provide after this event closes. So there's a portion there where you can add what was most interesting to you or what you learned today that you didn't already know. Please enter any information you would like to share with her there, and she will get to see that. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Spiegal, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and rest of your week, and I look forward to collaborating. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now I am going to very quickly share some upcoming events and that we have coming up soon. Let me just minimize this. So upcoming events, our next ONA highlight will be Dr. Maria Silveira. She'll be sharing some of the work they've been doing with her program, the Soil and Water Science program here at the center. The title of her presentation is Carbon Balance in Florida Grazing Lands Ecosystems. That's going to be held on November 9th at 11 o'clock. So please join us then. And then in December, on the 14th, we're going to be having a graduate student highlight with Clay Cooper, who has been advised by Dr. Brent Sellers in weed science, and he's going to be sharing some about the work that he did as a master's student with Dr. Sellers. His research focus was on investigating management strategies for controlling Brunswick grass in Bahia grass seed production fields in Florida. And then this week, on October 21st, at the Crossbar Ranch in Spring Hill, there's going to be an environmental lands management program. So that is very soon, and Dr. Silveira is taking part in that program, along with Dr. Elizabeth Boughton, Dr. Brent Sellers, Krista Kirby, and Lindsay Wiggins. I believe this is a full day program, and it is, again, in Spring Hill. Cost to register is $50, and it looks like it is an in-person event. So go to Eventbrite to register for that. Coming up in January is the 38th Annual Florida Cattlemens Institute and Allied Trade Show. This year's program is going to be held in Sebring at the Highlands County Fairgrounds, and that is on January the 13th. This is a full day program, well, beginning at 12:30, going till 6 p.m., and registration at this time is not required. If you're not already doing so, we invite you to follow us. Check out our website, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, check out our YouTube channel where we have recordings of all of these wonderful ONA highlights, as well as field day recordings and other events. And then if you do not already get our weekly Friday email news, please send us an email to this address to sign up to join our email list, and you will receive notices of timely events, and every Friday a newsy email to tell what's happening and what events we have coming up. And then what I'm going to do is whenever we get this recording processed and I send it to all those that registered for this event, I will include the information on these upcoming events, particularly the one this week and the upcoming webinars, so that you will have an opportunity to register for those. So again, thank you so very much for joining us today. We hope you have a great rest of the week, and we see you again in November. Thank you.